Just really, and again, for those of you who've seen this again, about the whole psychological safety, this is a very simplistic view, which is something happens. And again, quite often we look at being faced with conflict, criticism, or it might even be the lack of support, meaning relating to others from the isolation at home. It triggers something. And it may well trigger something as a perceived imminent threat where our limbic system comes in. You've heard of the amygdala hijack, the fight, flight, freeze reaction. That's a physical reaction to a perceived threat. And at one level, our brains don't know the difference between a difficult email and a physical assault. And that's interesting. We just hold that thought for a second. At one level, we will react in the same way to a difficult conversation or a difficult email as we would to a physical assault, because we haven't evolved as a species sufficiently. And it may trigger elsewhere in our bodies. We talk about the endocrine, that sinking feeling, that nausea, about the learnt anxiety. Oh dear, I know I've got that difficult meeting coming up. It's not an immediate threat, it's a future threat. So that's potentially how we make ourselves unsafe. And so realistically, we need to then say, well, okay, if we're in a situation where we're unsafe, we get a fear-based reaction. And we can symbolize that with fight, flight, freeze. In an organizational context, it's avoid. It's basically potentially write that email that you wished you'd never sent and kept in the draft box overnight. And so we're trying to then say, well, actually, part of what we're doing is let's pause, just even for a second. And instead of reacting, responding. So a lot of the work that we do, perhaps on an individual level, and working with some of the coaching and some of the profiling tools we get, is how can we build that momentary second that actually allows us to shift from reacting to responding. Part of that also, and again, we'll come back to this, is certainty and safety. And this seems to sit at the heart of it, which is if we understand our own requirements within certainty that we need to make us feel safe, we can adapt, potentially we can reframe that understanding. And the question really is, we need potentially to be able to sit with much greater levels of uncertainty, change, short-term and long-term. Those of you familiar with last century, goodness me, VUCA came up as a phrase, volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. We're really saying, well, actually, VUCA is almost the norm. It is uncertain, it is complex, it is ambiguous. This is our new operating norm.